Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome in. This is the Redbird Reboots. Our first game of the year. We've got Marcos Labrada on here with me. He's getting text messages because he's been so popular right now. Wanted to at least do first before we get into talking about the Cards. We do have a special announcement. Marcos is officially joining as the new co-host of the Redbird Reboot podcast. Super excited to have him on. Great analyst, great Cardinals fan, and even a better guy at least. So Marcos. We're all going to take it from here at the two of us, and glad to have you on as the full-time co-host, at least, as we break down these Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah, I can't wait. New season, new film, new scheme, new everything. I'm excited.
It's going to be great. Awesome. So, yes, the Arizona Cardinals, we do see them lose their first game of the year, 20-16 to the Washington Commanders. Just let's go over some initial thoughts, because I think I can speak for most Cardinals fans, Marcos, in that we probably expected more out of the offense than we got, and we probably expected less out of the defense than we got. But it still didn't quite add up to a win. But I think a lot of Cardinals fans, from at least what I can say, didn't expect this team to go out and dominate, and were maybe impressed with just some of the demeanor that we saw from the head coach and the defensive coordinator as the Cardinals kicked off this season on the road in what was pretty much a sloppy game with plenty of turnovers.
Yeah, I agree with you. The upside was on the offense, mostly because of the fact that people were glad to move away from like the scheme that we were operating from like the last 4 years and stuff. We saw a lot of under center action, which is great. That's good looking. That's good for the Cardinals going forward. On the defensive side, I was pretty excited to see what was gonna happen. I was getting over the whole like third. Let's go ahead and put in double mugs. Let's blitz. Let's give up that middle hook zone. The one in the middle where they always convert. Funny enough, against the Las Vegas Raiders, they converted on that same look when Vance Joseph called it with the Denver Broncos. So I was getting tired of that, and I saw a lot of like I tweeted about like how there was commonsensical like changes that I really liked, and that's why people are so. It's because their expectations for the defense was we're just gonna get ran over every single game, but this defensive performance without the penalties, we can't even. What is there to not like about this defense?
Right, and that's where I think what was really impressive overall wasn't just the being able to force turnovers, it was the physicality that the Cardinals showed. We saw a plethora of sacks. There were 6 sacks in the game overall that Sam Howell took. It's not maybe the strongest offensive line for Washington, especially not in years past when Trent Williams was stalwart for them. He's now, of course, with the division rivals. But the fact that you got to see, at least, that many different sacks, where the only player who had 2 sacks was Dennis Gardeck, of course, having one of the actual big plays in the game with that forced fumble. I think it really showcased a lot of what we can expect from this Cardinals defense, in that it's not going to be similar to last year's 4-3 kind of rush the 4 talented guys you have, play back in coverage. You're going to see guys being brought from different directions, a bit more of an attacking style defense, but like you brought up, with Vance Joseph, it would seem like you would have these all-out attacks that wouldn't necessarily play perfect defense. It wouldn't necessarily have everything covered. Whereas what we saw yesterday was the Cardinals managed to be able to get pressure while limiting big plays. It just wasn't, I think, enough in terms of being able to offset what little the offense is able to produce, which is probably to be expected, just given what Josh Dobbs had to deal with and given where this offense is as a whole for Arizona.
Yeah, I agree. It's just we got to keep in mind that one they gave up 1 touchdown in it. That was a slingshot or like a side shot by Sam Howell. You got to give him credit for that one. The second time it was off of a like a fumble that was recovered by Washington. So they have limited space to operate, and we can't fault them for giving up. What was it, like 20 yards or something?
Yeah, and then I know that Curtis Samuel had the longest, I believe, reception for the Commanders on the day, about 32 yards or so. Really, the biggest thing, I think, like you said, was you look at how things turned out with the game, and some of it is just there's the game, the flow, the narrative. Let's go over at least just with that hot start from Arizona. The biggest thing, at least, I think, through the first quarter was that we were able to see Arizona essentially be able to come out not just physical, but also maybe too physical. Cardinals were able to, at least after Washington went into a 3rd and 9, we at least were able to see them be able to stop them short, punt it back to Arizona. Cardinals were able to get a first down to Zach Ertz. I think the biggest area that you really wondered about was going to be, what was this Cardinals defense going to do against a young quarterback? How would we see with Jahan Dotson getting a lot of hype, Terry McLaurin being one of the best receivers in the NFC? And essentially what we really saw, I think, in that first quarter was we saw a penalty on, I believe it was Kaiser White, that ended up costing the Cardinals 15 yards. We had another penalty where the head was lowered by Jalen Thompson. He actually got hurt on the play, ended up coming back for another 15 yards. And then, of course, the big defensive pass interference call to, I believe it was Terry McLaurin. Marco Wilson was on the coverage. It's one of those cases of, you have in the NFL underthrown balls, the receiver comes back to it, the defensive back, even if they look back, you almost have to not interfere with the actual catching of the pass. You have to just more break up the pass. He ended up interfering with the receiver, and you end up with 1st and 10 from Arizona's 13. Sam Howell is able to get a touchdown to Brian Robinson. I think the way that the Cardinals were able to bounce back, for the most part at least, by being able to drive down the field, getting a field goal, mostly using those electric speedsters in Hollywood Brown and Rondale Moore. It felt like it was a bounce back that we hadn't seen necessarily from the team in 2022. Again, of course, I do think that you ended up seeing the Cardinals, unfortunately, come up short despite taking over in the Washington red zone. They just were not able to punch it in that first quarter.
Yeah, they just couldn't get any consistency going. And it was funny because I tweeted about the sideways plays, the jet sweeps, and then the screen passes. But I mean, we have Dobbs out there, so it's not like we have too much to complain about that. He did complete some throws over the middle, but what did we expect? I don't get that.
Yeah, it's a place, I think, where, like they said, the ball was a little bit high, a little outside. When you look at it to Zach Ertz, it's catchable, potentially, but, there's a difference between being able to make the catch, a difficult catch, and hitting a guy directly on the numbers. I think that if you hit Ertz on the numbers there, and that just shows kind of the relative nature of why is a quarterback like Josh Dobbs, is going to be cut or released from the Browns if he's not essentially acquired for a pick like this. There are guys who are able to make it work in the National Football League, and then when you see a surrounding cast and surrounding talent not be quite as, I guess you can say, it's just part of how it works in the nature of the game. There's going to be some throws that guys will make that will be incredible. There's some that just aren't going to quite measure up. I think that what's cool is, heading into this game, most people were picking the Cardinals to be blown out. It was essentially a huge spread that they had to cover of 7 points in order to be able to actually cover. And for those who maybe don't dabble as much in sports gambling or aren't as familiar, essentially it just means that either you pick the Cardinals to score within 7 points, or you pick the Commanders to outscore them by 7 points. It basically is a way of measuring whether a team can overperform based on their expectations. And by the end of one quarter, the Arizona Cardinals at least end up taking over. They start the second quarter with Zaven Collins intercepting Sam Howell. He gets rushed for the most part, at least, ends up not seeing the dropping edge player in Zaven Collins in coverage. He picks off the pass. You go into the second quarter, Arizona has to settle again for another field goal. But when you follow that up with another fumble, forcing a punt, and then scoring essentially a fumble for 6 points, the Cardinals go into the half, it seems like before that very last drive, up 13-7 against all expectations. I think the question, Marcos, is this more about the Cardinals being better than we thought they were? Or how much of this is going to be, we'll look back on this and say, gosh, yeah, sure, the Cardinals came out ready to play, but the Commanders, in hindsight, maybe are not going to be one of those, top 10, top 15 NFL teams. They may be closer maybe to the bottom of that 10 as far as for their overall talent level and overall quarterback play in the National Football League.
I think it's a little bit of both, where they're better than we thought they were, and also it's the Washington Reds. I'm sorry, I was about to say the R word. The Washington Commanders, the Commies.
Commies, there you go.
The Commies. That's how I always remember him. But it's hard to like remove that tag from there because that's how they've been. But it is who they are. Like they're starting. Sam Howell's what, second year uh, quarterback. He had to take the hasn't really had much time with the reins, mostly because of Taylor Heineke. But for the most part, it's a combination of both. So going forth, this kind of sets the baseline of what we can expect, at the very least, what we would think they would expect. Now we're going up
Hmm.
against the Giants next week. The Giants just got blown out 40-0. So I never thought the Cardinals were as bad as national media would talk about it, mostly because they don't really pay attention to the Cardinals to begin with. We don't get talked about, we don't get covered that much. So of course the expectation is going to be like, hey, they're not going to even compete. They're tanking. That's pretty obvious. They're getting rid of all these assets, um, and that's the direction they're going. And they're starting Josh Dobbs. So um, I don't know where people get
Yeah.
that thought.
Yeah, and I think some of it too is like you said, people are just picking. Some people have picked the Cardinals to go 0-17. I think a lot of people have looked at this as potentially a dumpster fire. I think what we saw out there, and this is also to be clear, we're not saying that this is like, oh, the Cardinals are gonna go 6-10 this year, or Cardinals have a side shot at the playoffs. Look how competitive. I think that it's relative to expectations. What we saw was a pretty well coached overall team. It wasn't that they gave up, 400 plus yards to Sam Howell. They didn't seem to get gashed on the ground. And they at least were very physical. You were able to see that. I think a lot of it is the story of those 6 sacks and even being able to force those turnovers. But then, of course, there's a caveat, and part of that was I got on a plane, was coming back from Michigan during part of the game. Goes at halftime, Cardinals are leading 13-10, and this is kind of the point where there's a narrative you can follow to each game. There's kind of like maybe not necessarily that every game has like a story, but for me, the story that I saw of why I think the Cardinals were probably going to lose that game was they forced 3 Commanders turnovers and they only led them by 3 points at the half. They gave up a big play just in the end of the second quarter where the Commanders were able to drive down, get a 30-yard field goal in under a minute. And it really felt like if Arizona was going to walk away and win this game, you were either going to need the offense to step up in a way that it hadn't. They had 3 takeovers. One of them, I know at least, was they took it back for 6. And instead, it's 13-10 going into the half. If you're Washington, you've got to be feeling at least a lot more confident, I think, as far as being able to still pull ahead with that game, because they had completed, I think, at least through the first few quarters, they had like up to 12 first downs. They were getting first down, getting to the red zone, and they turn it over to the Cardinals, go back down, getting into their boom, turn it over to the Cardinals. They end up having, of course, that fumble on the play with the 4 sack. Cam Thomas runs it in, fumble for 6. But really, it did feel like the Commanders, despite all of that, were still moving the ball relatively well. I think when we got to the second half, Marcos, and this is probably something we can look at, it really ended up flipping to the defensive side. The third quarter was a bit of back and forth. Arizona took over with a bit of the lead. But at the end of the day, the Commanders' defense ended up stepping up and being able to force Cardinals turnovers, and were able to then make it pay by getting that ball into, I believe it was with 1 touchdown in the fourth quarter, and then, of course, that game-sealing field goal that took the lead at the end of the game. Did you feel like that this was a game in which the Cardinals were going to be able to win partway through, or was this more of the avenue of feeling like that the Cardinals ultimately had gotten lucky up to this point? And as we've seen with this team, like so far, I feel like you may need to have a complete game in order to be able to get a win. And unfortunately, this is like, the Commanders, they had a lot of people excited. It felt like that they were a little bit more underwhelming, perhaps, from what I think we had hoped they could be. I don't know. I think at the end of the day, I was curious if you felt like that this is something that the Cardinals had. Was it a sustainable type of play that they could get? And we're talking about just Josh Dobbs making some mistakes, the defensive line getting past the O line, blowing up a few plays. Or is this something that the Cardinals are just kind of in this area of like, man, their talent is just not quite able to win those games, so they're going to have to like get those turnovers, get those stops, be able to punch it in the red zone instead of just kicking field goals in order to win.
Yeah, I thought we had a chance. I'm not even gonna lie.
Mm,
Halfway when we were up like 13-7, um,
mm,
I thought we really did have a chance. The problem was that the offense was going to have to burden that, mostly because of the fact that you can only do so much on your defensive side. And with the talent that we had on the field, we have talent, but we don't have first rounders like the Commanders do across their line. That's the reason why you draft these guys in the first round, because they can come up with plays. They did a very, very admirable job, and I'm proud of them for that. At the same time, the offense needed to do their job. They didn't do their job. This is them leaving the defense out to dry, but I had a lot of hope. I thought to myself, like, this is going to be a crazy expectation that, like, people think we're just going to go 0-17. We're going to draft Caleb Williams in the first round. It's not even a secret anymore. And then they beat the Commanders in the first game of the season. What a way to stick it. To stick it to
Yes.
Because I was what a way to stick it to the owner of the commies, who still hasn't even sold the team yet. He's telling everybody he's going to sell the team. Nobody likes him. Everybody wants him to just be gone already. So, like, what a way to stick it to him. Hey, you lost to the Cardinals the first game of the season. So,
it would have been a proving point, at least, for the entire team, I think. And the fact that I think that the Cardinals defense did just about everything that they could to be able to win that game. And it did feel like ultimately the offense just wasn't able to punch it in despite those opportunities. And making matters worse, like we said, I think that people have broken down that there was a sequence of plays where Arizona has the ball. They go at least for, I think this is in the fourth quarter, and this is just where the Washington defensive line just took over. You have James Conner basically goes and get tackled by Sweat for -1 yard on the play. Josh Dobbs tries to see if they can set up a screen, gets blown up, goes -2 yards. And then at least 3rd and 13, you're looking at that. He just tries to get the ball to Rondale Moore on a short kind of screen at least. They're trying to see if they can get it out of pressure. Gets blown up. The end of the game, the very next series, Arizona's driving, and they put Keontae Ingram in, which I don't know, at least as far as for the time frame of putting Keontae in. They essentially put him in. He ends up kind of losing yardage on the play. They don't really seem to rely on James Conner. And we just see that Josh Dobbs ends up kind of being stuck into this 1st and 15 area where he ends up fumbling the ball. Montez Sweat recovers it. And he ends up celebrating a bit too much, but you essentially have the ball set up at Arizona's 40-yard line. They only have to go a few yards to be able to kick a field goal. And that was really the game right there, ultimately. Just Arizona being able to have all of these different plays. I think it was actually even earlier you even had -1 yards, -4 yards. Josh Dobbs gets sacked. Let's get out Marcos added back in. Yeah, just going over. The Cardinals have the one sequence of plays. They force a 3 and out. They get the ball back. Keontae Ingram loses a yard. Josh Dobbs at least tries to run up. Jonathan Allen just blows up the play. And then there's the sack and fumble where De'Aaron Payne, I believe, recovers the ball. And it's 3rd and 15 at the Arizona 35. You look at all of those plays together, at least those two sequences, and it's a total of, you got -7 yards as a grand total on those two drives. Like, you basically end up seeing the Cardinals just go 3 and out, 3 and out. They technically, I think actually it's -13 yards total. They actually only were able to get, I think it was like a little bit back from the punt, but like, you're talking about it's the fourth quarter. You're up by 6. You got to go through and get your offense at least another set of safety points. Like, if you can even go down and get a field goal, you're good. Instead, the Cardinals fumble the ball back in their own territory to Washington. Very next drive, go 3 and out. And you end up with Washington being able to get better field position, force another fumble, and that was the game. So do you think that the offense lost the game for the defense, or was this more of a case of this is just kind of the Cardinals got stretched out really, really thin and then kind of snapped? Because I feel like this game was stretched out so thin based off of they did so well above expectations. They're having to kind of go back and pass against this pass rush that's heating up. It felt like almost a little bit too much to expect, I think, the Cardinals with a quarterback who just got here 2 weeks ago to deliver another set of points. But at the same time, like, you limit those 2 turnovers and maybe we're talking about a different end result.
I don't know why Josh Dobbs didn't just secure the fumble. Why didn't he just land on it? That was the worst decision. That's why I think they're trying to fumble the game away. I think they're
Uh,
just trying to give that game away, mostly because of that. Because he didn't land, secure the fumble. He tried picking it up and running with it, and it like yeah, I 100% think that the offense lost the game for us. And
mhm,
I thought it was kind of like odd that so I've heard people like Brett Coleman mentioned that Keontae Ingram would be the prototypical outside zone type of
mhm,
running back. That's what we're running with this wide zone scheme. Especially when you're talking about how he has to read the gaps from outside in, and you have to be able to cut back. James
mhm.
Conner isn't supposed to be built like that per se. He's supposed to be more of a power scheme. He had more success in this type of running scheme, whereas Keontae Ingram, every single time he got the ball, like there was somebody missing a block. He kept getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage, but
Mhm.
I don't I don't understand what's going on with this when it comes to like for this running scheme to work for like the way it's supposed to work. There's supposed to be a lot of motion to be able to
Yep.
open up blocks and traps. So we know that. We didn't really see any of that. So that's why I'm trying to get to see what this offense is going to develop as we go, because maybe this was a situation where Josh Dobbs just didn't have enough time on this type of
Mhm.
offense, even though he came from Cleveland, where they came. So I like I said, I blame the offense. I give all the ups to the defense. We'll see how that goes the rest of the year. But I don't know. I don't. I don't know what you think about what you thought about when you saw the line of scrimmage play on the
Yeah.
offensive side.
Yeah, I felt like, and this is kind of one of the areas you can look at. It felt like that the Cardinals were probably missing having a sturdier right guard that was in the game to be able to go up against some of these really tough defensive linemen. Like, I think at the first half, we got to see some of that motion you talked about. We got to see Marquise Brown essentially on kind of a little tricky play get an end around. We got to see Rondale Moore be able to kind of take a shot out of the backfield and being able to see kind of on a wheel route going outside. Josh Dobbs did a great job of hitting him. They call it like the honey hole or whatever you want to call it, like right in between the front cornerback and the safety. Hits him right in between there. And so you see that, okay, that's using those guys in motion. I think that when it came to the power run game, whether it was the calls, whether it went away, maybe some of it was just the looks that the Commanders shifted to. It did feel like it was a little bit more of him going back into shotgun, the Cardinals trying to run a bit more power, maybe kind of playing it safe. And when they got those strong defensive linemen, for one way or another, you can credit the Commanders. Maybe you say that it was play calling, but those are all things I think that are part of. There's going to be areas in that game, no matter what, that both sides are going to make mistakes. It's going to be, can you overcome those mistakes that you made? And the Cardinals, they did not have the ability to overcome when they weren't able to run the football in the fourth quarter, and Josh Dobbs is having to drop back and having to throw passes. Whether they even attempted like a screen to try to slow down the pass rush, that gets blown up. It was just one of those places where it did feel like the Cardinals ultimately didn't have the defensive line to be able to stop the Commanders from being able to close in and get those field goals. And they really didn't have that offensive line that could stop the Commanders' defensive line. And in that case, where it came to the trenches, I think where we were most impressed, I think if I can say, maybe I'm speaking for you, I was most impressed by the secondary, by the edge rushers, even the linebackers. It felt really like the Cardinals up front. You were hoping, I think, for a little bit more as far as just being able to, and I guess maybe I'm wrong on this, like it felt like that the defense gave as much as they could up front with the offensive line. It felt like they were just a bit outclassed, especially in that series. And you would have loved to have seen them figure out a way to be able to adjust. It just wasn't something that they were able to do in this game.
Right, that interior kind of just it was the interior that kind of was the weakness, especially Elijah Wilkinson. I
Yeah.
I think
Paris
he's too old.
Johnson, there was a rookie spot where
Or
he kind
John.
of gave up a sack on a bit of, I think it was like a bit of a bull rush move. Now, granted, it seemed like what happened was Jobs also stayed in the pocket a bit too, and this is kind of the way NFL works. Like, it's never one player's fault usually. Like, sometimes it's often a combination. In that case, like Paris gets beat on a move, he kind of was able to push the guy upfield out front. Dobbs either didn't have as much a pocket or wasn't able to, so he gets taken down with a sack there. And so, one of those cases, it's just you can say that's a veteran offensive. I should say rookie offensive tackle against a veteran defensive lineman who moved from the inside to outside, is able to get around. those are the type of plays that I do think you can trust a Paris Johnson to be able to learn from, to move from. You had DJ Humphries give up a sack. Part of it, I think, at least, is you take a look at the game and just say, are we able to see as the Cardinals be able to get enough plays to win? And I think after this, the question I think we've got to say is what's going to be next for this Cardinals team, because they're going into one of the tougher parts of this schedule. We'll be back on later this week to preview that against the Giants. But overall, do you feel more positive about leaving with this Cardinals team for what you've seen from week one? Or do you feel more negative that there were opportunities for Arizona to win the game and it felt like that they had that lead and they gave it up, at least in the fourth quarter, to the Commanders?
I feel more positive, but I would feel even more positive if I didn't find out that Josh Dobbs is getting the start against the Giants. So, I keep it's baffling. So maybe that is the case, that they just want to try to tank by using Josh Dobbs as a starter. But I saw a lot of good stuff from Clayton Tune during the preseason. So maybe if we can get some like consistency with like Josh Dobbs, I can say, okay, let's keep giving them the starts, let them fight valiantly. But I don't see it with him. I don't see it after this first game. So he doesn't really give me much confidence as far as like the offensive side. The defensive side, I like what I see going forth. Maybe I might be eating my words later on. Maybe this is just a one gaff and we go up against the Cowboys and they light us up, or we go up against a really good offense. But so far I feel good. I feel good about like the defense. I feel okay about the offense. Just some players to watch out for me, which is what I'm gonna keep my eye on, is Michael Wilson. He didn't really have the game that I thought he did on a route. It was like an inside slant for that fourth down. I'm not sure what his name is. I think his name is Forbes.
Yeah, that's the rookie this year.
Mm-hmm. He ran the route for him on a perfect time. And this is going to be something Michael Wilson is going to have to learn when it comes to like knowing when to break into that slant. So I mean, that's going to be a learning tool for him, and for Paris Johnson as well. He graded, I believe, like a 74 on his pass protection.
PFF
that's
grade.
Really good. Of course, his run grade wasn't all that great, but I think he's just going to pick it up because he's a slender type of athletic tackle. And I've already said I don't agree with like moving up to get him, but he's a Cardinal, so I want him to be that, ascend to that all-pro type of status. And sure. I like what I saw. I like what even on that tackle.
Yeah.
I mean, even on
first
that,
game as an NFL rookie, you're going up against the Commanders' defensive line, and like the one thing we're talking about is here's one sack at least that we saw that you were able to give up. They were still able to be in there running the football. It was at least to that spot of saying, like, if he'd gone out there and given up like 3 straight sacks and looked lost out there, then I think there's a whole different conversation. So I think that in and of itself, by not being a loss, I think I would count that as a win, because being a rookie is very, very difficult in this league. I think also even just forcing those turnovers, like the physical play the Cardinals had, like we talked about with last year with Vance Joseph to this year, it really felt like that last year you would see some of the star players would make some plays, like J.J. Watt splash play, Zach Allen getting a splash play, having Zaven Collins getting that pick 6 against the Saints. You still saw one of those splash plays, but ultimately it was a bunch of different guys who were basically thumping, flying around, keeping guys contained. And that result, it felt like it was more of a team effort. That's one thing I think that I would take away, is just the overall, I believe it was, defense for Arizona. Like, they were able to essentially hold the Commanders to 156 passing yards, and they held them to 92 rushing yards. Like, they actually did much, much better, I think, than anyone would have said. Neither team got to 300 yards, and I think maybe that's probably where, if you would take out just some of those early penalties being overly physical, this very well could have been the Cardinals' game, just because of how well they were able to hold the Commanders down. Now, obviously, different situation as far as I think the offense. They were ranked, I think, of looking to average about 18 points a game or so. They ended up with about 20. Cardinals were estimated to be about 14 points or so for this game. You can say that, yeah, the Cardinals, they overperformed, I think, from what we expected. The Commanders, maybe they underperformed a bit. The fact that it still wasn't enough is part of why I think that we're all accepting that this is going to be a long season. But I think it's still one of those cases of we see spots to hang our hat on. It's just the house is still being built, like we're still seeing the team having to go and learn what it's like to be able to be tough on the road with a new regime, of being able to know what it's like with, a backup quarterback who the play I think that defined it most that I could see was they have a penalty, they get pushed back where it's like 3rd and 13, and they just do a quick check down play to the running back. He gets tackled immediately. Like they didn't even attempt to go for it on 3rd and long just because they didn't want to give up a sack or a mistake. It was just trying to play it safe. And considering how long Dobbs has been with the team, that he's more of a backup type in this league, it was one of those spots where I can say that I would rather see them be aggressive or put that trust in there, but at the same time, you saw how the game ended, you saw where the fumbles went for everything. You just are kind of looking, I think, for the most part, of what are some of those positives to be able to take away. And I think we did get plenty of that on the defensive side and a little bit on the offensive side. And so now it'll be what growth we see for the Cardinals doing over the next few games as we get closer to what seems to be the return of one Kyler Murray.
Yeah, that's going to be like the storyline until he returns and whatnot, because we're going to have to evaluate, especially these first 4 weeks, to see where the Cardinals are going to be and what decisions they might go. But if it's a performance like this, I mean, if you have a good defense, you're in every game at least. So if the defense can be the foundation and can keep this season competitive, that's great news, especially when Kyler Murray comes back. If they do decide to bring him back, which I think most of us can agree that we would want to see him back so that he can get those reps in. So, first 4 weeks is going to be very important. That's when usually you get a tendency of what type of scheme and what we're trying to run with. So, like I said, it's going to be a long season. Just Cardinals fans, just keep that in mind. Everything needs to be about hey, what improvements are we seeing? What can we take away every single week, and what can we build upon?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's great. We'll have more of an in-depth preview looking at the Giants game, but moving forward, just a little bit of a teaser for that. Man, the Giants lose 40-0 to the Cowboys. You see multiple sacks. Daniel Jones does not look good. Do you feel like that this is going to be more of all right, Cardinals going into this game that's a home game, have that home crowd, have that advantage at least going in, having the just having at least some of the knowledge that you at least didn't feel despondent or that you blew the game, feeling some of that confidence going into this Giants that this could be a winnable game? Or do you feel like this is, because one thing I at least could feel like is this maybe also be a chance of the Giants were a playoff team last year. Maybe the Cowboys do have one of those best defenses in the National Football League. We saw them just terrorize Daniel Jones. Is this a spot where the Giants are just going to get a whooping and they're going to try to take out some of that anger on the Cardinals? Because I think if you're a Cardinals team that's able to hold fast with the Commanders, if you can go up against this Giants team next week at home and be able to do similar, as far as maybe it's 2016, maybe you're able to kind of eke out a win, you'll probably be starting to feel a lot more confidence in this team moving forward than if the Cardinals are just, they just got lucky playing a bad team. Next week they just end up kind of getting, Saquon rushes for 150 yards. What do you feel like the Cardinals would have to show to be able to say that, yeah, this team is trending in a better direction than we thought they would? Or are we just going to be sitting back here as Cardinals fans, just waiting for another type of home victory?
I think this is going to be competitive. That's what I think. That's what we can all hope for, at least, because we can't just go into the idea of next week hey, they got whooped by the Cowboys, it's going to be a landslide for us. We're not I hate to say it, but we have different scenarios going into this game. I mean, we can't have that expectation of knowing that, hey, they couldn't even put up any points against the Cowboys. But I would like to see them compete. Everybody mentions that these players were playing for Jonathan Gannon. Let's see that again. And if we do see by the first or second quarter, we're within 3 points, whether we're up or we're down by 3 points, that's a good sign. And we have to keep maintaining that throughout the entire game, because there was times where the Cardinals fans know this. there's games where it just gets out of control, and we can never seem to fight our ways. We can never seem to fight back into like getting back into the game. The only time that I do remember ever seeing that in this last regime, especially with Kyler Murray, was against that Detroit Lions game where we ended up tying, where they were down by a good amount of points. We fought back, we tied the game, had a chance to win it if I forgot what his name is, the cornerback that we had to release. His last name, I think his last name ends with Brock. Not sure. He
Oh
can't
yeah,
catch a
Tremaine
football.
Brock. Tremaine Brock was
Tremaine
it?
Brock. He
Yeah.
can't catch a football. Really, it saved his life. So I think the one thing to also look forward to is like let's see how our secondary does this against this team, because even though they're not really known for throwing the ball all over the field, when it came to the Washington Commanders, we didn't have much of an expectation for them to light us up, even if they had Terry McLaurin and they had Josh Dobbs. I think this Giants team is built more well rounded. They do focus more on the run game. So let's see how the secondary does against their wide receivers. Darren Waller's now a Giant, so there's something to look at when it comes to like how we're going to defend tight ends this year.
Yep. No, I definitely agree. It's something where Daniel Jones, mobile quarterback, hardly gonna be able to stop him. It's gonna be a great look at that. We're gonna stick around at least if you want to for a little bit on our Twitter stream and a YouTube channel. We'll be doing a little bit of film breakdown, I should say, doing a little film sesh here with Marcos. So we'll log off at least on the audio side. Before we go, at least Marcos, if you want to be able to tell people like where you're writing for, any other content that you've had, and then we can get into our film sesh.
You guys can find me on AZ Sports Underground. I'm a writer and contributor to the website, and also you can find me on X, not Twitter, X at Pancake Soul, and basically just Pancake Soul with the double S in the middle.
There you go. Yep, and I'm on Twitter at BlakeMurphy7 as well as at Revenge of the Birds, and you'll be able to follow us at Redbird Reboot Podcast. Thank you guys so much, at least, for tuning in. This has been the Redbird Reboot. It's time for the audio side to log off. All right, Marcos, let's get ready for that film session. If you want to kind of pull some stuff up in the, whether it's any plays that you liked or something that you looked at. Really, a lot of what I think this year we're seeing overall that I at least have appreciated is being able to have a Cardinals team that when I watch some of the tape on Rewind, it doesn't seem that there's guys being blown out of different places or seeing some of the breakdowns. Maybe that will change as the season goes, obvious, but at least from the passing glance of being able to look at it and catching up on the second half, I really did at least feel like it was a better watch, I think, than I was expecting for this Cardinals defense especially.
Well, I'm having an issue with this actually downloading the whole way, so I was just gonna let you take point today
Oh, okay.
for being able to like pull up any plays, because it once I downloaded it, it wouldn't even let me extract it.
Oof. All right. Well, live podcasting, folks, will be sometimes what can happen there. So let me see if I can get this at least pulled up here, because one of the things I did want to at least be able to try to go over, and I can pull up on my side, was talking about the Dennis Gardeck sack, because I think that what a lot of people have not necessarily appreciated with the likes of a Dennis Gardeck is just how good of a player that he has been overall in the NFL. Like, as far as a guy who you expected would be a strong special teamer, someone who ultimately is not necessarily a, I guess you could say, maybe more of a gamer. He's had 2 years where he's been incredibly efficient on his sacks. I think it was Kyle Odegaard who was the one who actually has mentioned this, and obviously former Cardinals writer has talked about things all the time. The biggest thing, at least as far as with someone like Gardeck, is he shouldn't have that necessary type of like lower athleticism to be able to make some of the sacks he does, but it's out of the sheer effort being able to use his strength and his hands that he's been able to do so well. I believe it's in 2020, obviously, is the big year. That's the year where I believe it was the year with Chandler Jones was still on the Arizona Cardinals. He went out, I think, after 4 games. You ended up seeing him get 7 sacks and only 94 snaps. He didn't get anything in 2021. The team basically had J.J. Watt around. He only had 1 sack in 2022, played about 200 snaps. The Cardinals last year just were not a good pass rush. They played a lot of the rookies, at least, to see what they were. He's already got 2 this year, and he's only been in there in 28 snaps. So, like, you're talking about a guy who's, like, one of the most efficient pass rushers in the National Football League. One of the, least efficient, and then, boom, he's right back to being where he was, at least, previously. That's something that's really impressive, I think, at least, is sometimes sacks come in waves, as they say, but I think it does speak to his greater effort, and also even, like, when the Cardinals said their sack leaders are going to be Zaven Collins and Dennis Gardeck, I was a bit surprised. That seems like the Cardinals front office knew quite a bit about what they were doing.
It's I can't emphasize so much how important it is to have that natural leverage in the NFL. It's kind of a weird concept because back then you had to have your pass rushers be like 6'5", 6'4". They have to be weighing around like 250 to 270 pounds. Now you have this 235 pound like ex inside linebacker now moving to the outside. And how is he having this efficiency or the success? Especially, since that same year was when Son Reddick had 12 and a half sacks. We're talking about 2 guys who are about like 6 foot to 6'2", and
sure,
weighing about the same amount. So it's kind of unconventional. What is a thing that I do bring up a lot is that Aaron Donald's 6'1". Now we're talking about 2 different types of players. Obviously, we're not talking about them being in the same stratosphere as Aaron Donald, but that leverage does work towards their advantage because if you were to look at like their leg strength, like Dennis Gardeck, for example, he has a lot of his power in his legs. So then, since he's lower, his pads are lower than the offensive tackle, offensive guard, which can kind of catch you off guard when you see him like bull rush and these guys are actually like backing out. Well, because he's getting under the pads. So when he's getting under the pads, he's using those legs as like not pistons, but like just like all the force is just going straight up in just a straight line, and it's helping him to be able to like beat these guys. So on that sack that you mentioned about where he forced the fumble, did you see the spin move he made? It was like lightning quick.
Yeah, and that's something I think, at least when we talk about like developing or what players look like, there's a difference between kind of being a natural at some of the position versus good technique. Obviously, there's a certain amount of work that you can do to be able to make it in the league. But there's also, at least, like you said, there is a level, at least, of being able to have some of like the natural bend, and when you don't have some of those skills, a lot of times you have to work harder at those pieces to be much better. And that's something I think is really cool to be able to see in someone like Gardeck, someone who, longtime special teamer, is not drafted, is not even really scouted. He's able to make a living on special teams for a while until he kind of gets that opportunity. And when he does get that opportunity, he plays great and is able to basically get the player of the game, as far as I'm concerned, because having those 2 sacks, being able to make overall the I guess the play that led to the, I should say, fumble 6, super impressive, at least I think, and what he's been able to do. Especially with Zaven Collins, we've talked about him being used as an edge player who's able to drop back into coverage. I think is probably a better spot for him than being pure at having to be like that knifing through the defense inside linebacker. While Kaiser White, I didn't like how he had that one play of running kind of that late hit, even though you like the physicality. We still were able to see, I think, at least as Cardinals fans, a really solid, almost a really solid performance from him, where he wasn't giving up, getting completely beaten or crushed around the edge, and he wasn't necessarily getting the most tackles, but when he was needed to, he was able to read the eyes of the quarterback. Sam Howell stares down his receiver, and he's able to get an interception and have the Cardinals take over right in place, where you're like, this is really kind of what we've been hoping to see from Zaven Collins, and we had saw a little glimpse of last year. Now it's just, will we be able to see something like this more often than not?
Yeah, it just makes more sense to have Zaven at the edge, and I agree with you. He is better at playing that natural position. Now, from looking at both of our edge defenders, you would say that Gardeck would play the Hassan Reddick role. It would actually be Zaven Collins playing this Hassan Reddick role. I don't have too much trust in Dennis Gardeck dropping into coverage, and it's not his fault. I wouldn't blame him for that, because when it comes to like tackling a tight end who's like 6'5" in space, we saw that last year against the Eagles, where he had to drop into coverage on that blitz look on that 3rd and 12, and basically had to he gave up that reception to Dallas Goedert. He turns around, gets that extra bit of yardage that basically wins the game for us. So Dennis Gardick should just be a full-time pass rusher. Zaven Collins has shown that he can be shifty enough to be able to cover in space, and obviously we saw him drop into that hook curl and get that interception.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, we can see that now, at least for the most part. I'll go ahead and share my screen just because I wanted to be able to break this part down. Let's go ahead and take a look at the, let me share the screen over here, interception play. So this is going to be just the start of the second quarter. You've got at least the Commanders, at least, are going on a play action fake that you're able to see here. So this is going to be looking at ultimately a I formation. You've got your 2 receivers there, tight end at least there is set on the line. And you see when they drop back, it looks like it's kind of starts off as a max protect look, essentially, where you're looking at a 2-man route. You see the tight end kind of leaks out late, running back kind of chips on his way out, and then you've got this guy open here in the flat. This is one of those plays in which you can tell that they're trying to get to, I believe it's Terry McLaurin. No, I think it's either McLaurin or Dotson here in the corner. The Cardinals, at least up front, he holds onto the ball a lot longer than he should. There's a lot of guys, at least, whether it's the processing or reading, I think he's at least eyeing. There's 2 guys that are right here making sure that he can at least get it fit in. Eventually, you've got one of the Cardinals defenders break free, is about to get a hit on him. He goes ahead and throws the ball, but doesn't read the underneath man here in Zaven Collins. He just kind of lines up, is able to get that pick of I think it was Dotson was the intended target that they have here. You're able to see kind of now from the box view, and this is really kind of where you get to see part of where you take advantage of a defender on Howell. You can see how the Cardinals start off here. You got Zaven Collins in the edge, basically looking like he's about to blitz. They bail out of that blitz after kind of a little bit of faking it. He drops back. And you can see here the protection overall for Howell is good. He's just not reading the play at the right amount of time. Shifts a little bit to his right. You finally have Jonathan Ledbetter's able to get past the right tackle over there. He throws the ball, and Collins just dropped back deep enough, at least, to kind of settle in that zone spot, and he just goes after, picks off the quarterback. He did see maybe on that side, you could see Marco Wilson. It looks like he may have been about to fall down in that scenario. I think that's something that at the end of the day, really, you Cardinals maybe are lucky that you did have Zaven Collins drop back on that side, but I think it's just a testament to when you're seeing teams be able to be disciplined and drop back and be able to be in those zones as they're supposed to be. Like, this is maybe a Vance Joseph thing. It felt like the Cardinals too often would be in zone, but they would be a little too close. The ball would kind of sail over them, or they'd be a little too far back, and you'd be able to see guys get hit on slants or option routes right out of the backfield. For whatever reason, it feels like the depth the Cardinals played at in this spot is much better, and I'll show that play one more time here with just looking at Zaven Collins from the depth that you see with Howell. These are the types of mistakes that rookie quarterbacks are going to make. It's type of with Jacoby Brissett. I know he stared down a guy a bit too much. These are the types of plays I think that if Jonathan Gannon's defense can capitalize on these types of plays throughout the season, then the Cardinals may not be a run stuffer. They may not be a pass rushing team. But if they can blitz and get pressure like they did and force turnovers, then I think this defense is in a spot where all you'll need to kind of do is, like, those just add water pieces. Just add talent is going to be kind of, I think, the recipe. And I think that's something that a lot of Cardinals fans can walk away from being relatively glad about.
I was about to say, I was like, you wanted to take all the glory, didn't you?
I clicked the wrong button there, at least. So yeah, it's just we're still getting used to the video setup, I know, in some ways for the most part. But yeah.
Hey guys, we're fine. We're figuring this out as well. But once we get this figured out, we're gonna hit the ground running, and we're just gonna keep going consistently. But on that play, just like you mentioned, he fakes like pass rushing. So this is the type of thing that the Tennessee Titans were actually renowned for doing last year on their defensive side. Now, they don't have the most talent on defense. They weren't the best defense out there, but they would do this type of, and I have to go ahead and apologize. I don't have the actual term for it. I will find out what the term is. But this type of blitz look is a blitz look where you have a edge defender drop into a hook zone. So the whole reasoning and the whole purpose of this is you don't want to leave just people to dry out in coverage. So when you fake a pass rusher and you have them drop into a zone, they're either defending the flat in that area, they're making sure that they can make that wide open tackle just in case like you send another defender. Like you might send a defensive back on the opposite side of the field that's gonna rush a lane. Maybe it'll be the A, B, or C gap, whatever the plan may be. And it's kind of like a fake blitz, because a blitz is, you send more than four defenders. That's a blitz by definition. So you're still sending four, but you're sending that extra defender in an area where they're expecting to get more coverage, or they're expecting to have more like protection on that side. So you just kind of want to like, in a way, just make them shift their projections so that way you can have that open gap, get the pressure, and do it with just four people rushing. So Zaven dropping back into that hook curl zone, just reading the quarterback's eyes. That's magnificent. Right there.
They loaded the right hand side. I think it's called overload. I know is when they'll load one side of the field. Sometimes overload will actually, I think, be there's loading side of the field, and then overload will be you have a defensive back or a corner or someone else is also on that side. So essentially, it's like, all right, you got to move the tight end over to this side here because that's the case. Instead, what they did was, like you said, they did more of the hook that had Zaven brought back into coverage. The tight end, as a result, was kind of staying in there to protect against a blitzer that never was, and as a result, with it being a two-man route, Cardinals ended up having a numbers advantage. Despite that, they still weren't able to get to Howell with rushing four. They were able to get pressure, and enough of that pressure that he decided to go and throw that pass to Jahan Dotson. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Cardinals were able to come up with a takeaway. I think that the other thing, when you look at earlier, like you talked about, I think earlier, there's two times that I think coverage sacks came up for the Cardinals. One was on a Paris Johnson play that we saw, at least. It was more of a coverage sack that he gave up. The other was, I believe, in that fumble that was forced that Cam Thomas picked up. That was more of a coverage sack. When you look at and see on the All-22, the Cardinals were pretty disciplined overall in their zones. You had some of the guys were at least matched. Sam Howell ends up kind of trying to be able to make a play, and when he gets tackled, loses the ball, and Cam Thomas is able to scoop it up. That was, I think, a really good example of just being disciplined on defense. You're not necessarily having to go all out, but you're able to, I think, and sometimes when we say with some quarterbacks, they'll be more likely to prone to fumble than others. When you're a young quarterback who've not gotten a lot of starts, like between him and Josh Dobbs, we saw both of them turn the ball over on the ground in this game, and that's something I think that we can expect for the most part, one way or the other, I think, with some of these younger quarterbacks versus going up against, say, you have to hit a guy like a Matthew Stafford a lot harder, or you're going to have to really do a lot better of being able to get to a Brock Purdy who's got a great at least protection, great weapons around him, and can run around quite a little bit. But in this game, it felt like the Cardinals were at least coached up well. And that's something I think that I would take away from this game is it's the first sign of saying, hey, like it's not like saying that this is a disaster at coaching. We can feel like there's something positive to build on.
Yeah, definitely. Especially looking at like just a little bit of the scheme, perhaps like on that last play. It looked like they were having a quarters coverage type of call, and they were trying to generate some sort of pressure coming from a different position, coming from a different side of the field. That's something that like Jonathan Gannon did do quite a bit over with the Eagles. The Eagles, of course, fans will tell you that like that wasn't the case. He would be conservative when it came to blitzing. It's just that he disguised his blitzes. That's what we want.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's one of the things, at least, that we can see with all of that. Let's go ahead and wrap it up there, at least for our episode. For the most part, thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, make sure you're following us on YouTube or Twitter at the Redbird Reboot Podcast. Make sure you can always follow me at Blake Murphy 7. Marcos, let our viewers kind of know where they can find you and some of your content as well.
You can find me on X, Pancakes, Soul, and of course, you can see my content on azsportsunderground.com.
Excellent. Awesome. Thank you guys again for joining us so much. We're going to tune out and we'll tip back in later this week with a Giants preview. Should be a lot of fun. Take care, everyone.